We just crossed a threshold that most people don't even realize happened. Ukraine has deployed fully autonomous robotic ground units in direct combat operations, and they've recorded their first confirmed kill against Russian forces. Now I know what you're thinking. This sounds like science fiction, like something out of a Hollywood blockbuster. But this is happening right now on European soil, and the implications are staggering. What we're witnessing isn't just another incremental step in military technology. This represents a fundamental shift in how wars will be fought, who controls the battlefield, and ultimately, who profits from endless conflict. The defense contractors, the AI tech giants, the venture capital firms, they've been waiting for this moment, this proof of concept, to justify billions in investment. And here's what troubles me most. Once this particular genie is out of the bottle, there's no putting it back. We're talking about removing the human element from life and death decisions on the battlefield, and that changes everything, morally, legally, strategically. The question isn't whether this technology works. Clearly it does. The question is, what kind of world are we building when machines make the decision to kill, and who's really in control of that future? Because I can promise you, it's not the people who will have to live with the consequences. Let me walk you through what actually happened, because the details matter here, and the corporate media isn't giving you the full picture. In December 2024, Ukrainian forces conducted what appears to be the world's first successful military operation using only ground robots and aerial drones, with no human soldiers directly engaged in the assault. This wasn't a field test, this wasn't a demonstration for investors, this was a live combat operation in the Kharkiv region, and it worked. The 3rd Separate Assault Brigade, specifically their experimental drone company with the ominous name Deus Ex Machina, which translates to God from the machine, and I don't think that's accidental, deployed a combination of kamikaze ground robots and first-person view drones to assault fortified Russian positions that had previously withstood attacks by human soldiers. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The operation began with a kamikaze ground robot targeting a Russian defensive bunker, and when the explosion destroyed the stronghold, the remaining Russian soldiers surrendered as another robot approached their position. Think about that for a moment. Russian soldiers, battle-hardened troops who've been fighting for years, looked out of their positions, saw machines advancing instead of men, and chose to surrender rather than face what was coming. That tells you something profound about the psychological impact of this technology. When you're facing a machine that doesn't feel fear, doesn't hesitate, doesn't get tired, and keeps advancing no matter what you throw at it, the calculus of warfare fundamentally changes. But let's zoom out for a second, because this didn't happen in a vacuum. Ukraine has been transforming itself into what military analysts are calling the world's largest live-fire laboratory for autonomous weapon systems. Around 250 defense startups across Ukraine are creating these robotic systems at secret locations that typically look like rural car repair shops, producing unmanned ground vehicles for a fraction of the cost of imported models. We're talking about entrepreneurs building combat robots in abandoned warehouses and factory basements. One company, UK Prototype, can assemble an 800-kilogram ground drone called the Odyssey in just 4 days. And here's the kicker. It costs $35,000. That's roughly 10% of what an imported equivalent would cost. 10%. Do you understand what that means for the economics of warfare? When you can field 10 robots for the price of one traditional system, you've changed the entire equation. And it's not just about cost. In February 2024, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky created the National Unmanned Systems Forces as a 4th branch of the military, joining the Army, Navy, and Air Force. Let that sink in. Ukraine now has an entire military branch dedicated to unmanned warfare. This isn't some side project or experimental unit. This is a fundamental reorganization of their military structure to accommodate this new reality. They're not hedging their bets here. They're going all in on a vision of warfare where machines increasingly replace humans in the most dangerous roles. Now, the official narrative you're hearing is all about saving Ukrainian lives. And look, there's truth to that. Facing manpower shortages and overwhelming odds, Ukrainian officials openly state they cannot spend a lot of human lives and describe war as mathematics. When you're up against a country with effectively unlimited reserves of manpower and you're losing your best people, the calculus becomes brutal and clear. Robots don't have families. Robots don't require years of training. Robots don't suffer trauma. And most importantly, robots can be replaced with a credit card and a workshop. But here's what they're not talking about in the press conferences and the glossy promotional videos. Once you've normalized the use of autonomous weapons, once you've proven they work, once you've demonstrated they can achieve military objectives at a fraction of the human and financial cost, there's no going back. Every military in the world is watching this. Every defense contractor is taking notes. Every venture capital firm with ties to the defense industry is calculating potential returns. Let me paint you a picture of where this is heading, because the trajectory is clear if you're paying attention. Ukraine plans to field 15,000 robotic platforms by 2025, including mobile anti-aircraft launchers, mine-clearing unmanned ground vehicles, and advanced systems that have already proven effective in capturing Russian positions without a single Ukrainian casualty. 15,000 robots in 1 year, and Russia isn't sitting still either. Following Defense Minister Andrei Belousov's December 2024 order to create the Unmanned Systems Troops, Russia has rapidly expanded this capability, with President Vladimir Putin claiming Russian forces received over 1.5 million drones in 2024 alone. We're watching an arms race unfold in real time, and it's not about who has more tanks or more artillery shells anymore. It's about who can deploy more autonomous systems faster. Now here's where I need you to think critically about what's actually happening beneath the surface. The technology we're seeing deployed in Ukraine right now isn't cutting edge in the traditional sense. Engineers are taking inspiration from articles in defense magazines or online videos to produce cut-price platforms with weapons or smart components added later. In other words, this isn't about some revolutionary breakthrough in artificial intelligence or robotics. The core technology has been available for years. What's revolutionary is the application, the scale, and most importantly, the willingness to deploy it in lethal roles. The barrier wasn't technological, it was political, legal, and moral. And in Ukraine, those barriers have evaporated under the pressure of existential warfare. Let me tell you about the ethical debate that's been raging for years because it's crucial context. Human Rights Watch, the United Nations General Assembly, leading AI researchers, they've all been calling for restrictions or outright bans on autonomous weapon systems. Elon Musk has warned about this. The founders of DeepMind have expressed concern. There's been this global conversation about whether we should allow machines to make kill decisions without human oversight. And you know what? That conversation just became academic. Ukraine has demonstrated not only that these systems work, but that they provide genuine tactical advantages. The moral arguments, no matter how compelling, tend to lose steam when one side is deploying technology that saves their soldiers' lives and wins battles. Here's what really troubles me, and I want you to understand why this matters for America, for global stability, for the future your children are going to inhabit. In December 2024, Ukraine successfully carried out a groundbreaking all-drone, multi-domain attack on Russian positions, deploying dozens of unmanned systems equipped with machine guns and munitions, all without any crewed platforms or soldiers on the ground. This is the first time in human history that an entire military operation was conducted by machines alone. Not supported by machines, not augmented by machines, conducted by machines, and it succeeded. From a military standpoint, it's brilliant. From a humanitarian standpoint, it's terrifying. Because let's talk about what happens next. Every insurgency, every terrorist organization, every non-state actor with enough technical know-how is watching this and realizing that asymmetric warfare just got a lot more accessible. When you can build a lethal autonomous system in a shed for $35,000, you've democratized military force in a way that's unprecedented. The barriers to entry for conducting sophisticated military operations have collapsed. And it's not just about conflict zones in Eastern Europe. Think about what this means for domestic security, for law enforcement, for the balance of power between governments and citizens. Once autonomous weapons are normalized on the battlefield, how long before they show up in other contexts? Now, let me connect this to the broader economic picture, because that's where the real story lives. Ukrainian officials have stated that in 2025, more autonomous drones with AI targeting will arrive on the battlefield, potentially making way for real drone swarm users aided by willing partners like the Germany-based Helsing AI firm delivering thousands of AI-equipped unmanned aerial vehicles. Notice how quickly the defense industry has pivoted. Western companies aren't just selling weapons to Ukraine anymore, they're partnering with Ukrainian startups, they're using the battlefield as a testing ground, they're gathering data that will inform the next generation of military technology. This is Silicon Valley's dream scenario, a real-world laboratory where you can test your products under actual combat conditions, gather performance data, refine your algorithms, and then market the proven technology to militaries around the world. The defense contractors have been waiting for this moment for decades. Autonomous weapons have been the holy grail of military technology since the first drones took flight, but there's always been reluctance to fully commit. Questions about reliability, concerns about public perception, worries about setting precedents. Well, Ukraine has eliminated all of that hesitation. They've provided the proof of concept, they've demonstrated operational effectiveness, and now the floodgates are open. Every major defense contractor is ramping up their robotics and AI divisions. Every military is revising their procurement strategies, and every government is calculating whether they can afford to be left behind in this race. But here's the part that should really concern you, and I don't think this is getting enough attention in the mainstream discussion. In October 2024, in the Ukrainian-occupied Kursk region, Russian forces captured and executed 9 Ukrainian drone operators, treatment reminiscent of the brutal response historically reserved for flamethrower operators and snipers. The Russians hate these drone operators with a viscosity that goes beyond normal combat hatred. Why? Because drones have inflicted devastating casualties while their operators sit safely kilometers away. There's something about that asymmetry, about the ability to kill without personal risk, that provokes a primal rage. And that tells us something important about the future of conflict. As warfare becomes more automated, the few humans still involved become even more valuable targets, and the violence directed at them becomes more extreme. This is creating a feedback loop. The more effective autonomous weapons become, the more militaries will rely on them. The more they rely on them, the more operators become priority targets. The more dangerous it becomes to be an operator, the more pressure there is to remove humans from the loop entirely. And before you know it, we're in a world where wars are being fought by machines against machines, with humans making strategic decisions but not tactical ones. And here's the question nobody's asking: who's responsible when an autonomous system makes a mistake? When a robot misidentifies a target and kills civilians, who goes to war crimes tribunal? The programmer, the commanding officer, the defense contractor, the government that deployed it. We're creating weapon systems that operate in a legal and moral gray zone, and we're doing it at scale before we've figured out the framework for accountability. Let me be very clear about something, because I don't want to be misunderstood. I'm not saying Ukraine is wrong to pursue this technology. When you're facing an existential threat, when your cities are being bombed and your people are dying, you use every tool available. I'm not making a moral judgment about Ukrainian choices. What I'm saying is that we need to understand the implications of what's being normalized here. Ukraine is setting precedents that will echo for generations. They're establishing norms around autonomous weapons that will be cited by every country, every military, every organization that wants to deploy similar systems in the future. And the economic incentives are overwhelming. Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister Mikhailo Fedorov, who has played a key role in overseeing Ukraine's drone procurement, has been a leading force in fostering private-public innovation in military technology throughout the war. This isn't just military procurement, this is industrial policy. Ukraine is building an entire economy around autonomous weapons production. They're creating jobs, they're attracting investment, they're developing expertise that will be valuable long after this war ends. Which means they have every incentive to keep pushing the boundaries, to keep innovating, to keep demonstrating new capabilities. And as they do, they're pulling the entire global defense industry along with them. Here's where it gets even more concerning. Ukraine is at the forefront of military technology, leveraging robotics and automation to redefine modern warfare and serve as a testing ground for future combat technologies, already using AI-enabled drones with deployment of autonomous ground robots becoming a reality. The testing ground language is important. When military analysts and defense officials talk about Ukraine as a testing ground, they're not being metaphorical. They literally mean that weapon systems are being deployed, evaluated, refined, and improved based on battlefield performance. This is product development at scale with live fire testing. And the data being generated is worth billions. Every engagement provides feedback, every successful mission validates design choices, every failure informs the next iteration. Now think about the geopolitical implications. The United States, China, Russia, Israel, Turkey, every major military power is developing autonomous weapon systems. But Ukraine has something none of them have: actual combat experience at scale. Ukraine's armed forces have carried out a milestone special operation that marks a turning point in the use of unmanned ground systems on the battlefield, with soldiers of the 5th Separate Assault Brigade stopping a Russian armored breakthrough attempt using domestically developed technology. They're not running simulations, they're not conducting exercises, they're using these systems in real combat against a peer adversary under the most demanding conditions imaginable. That experience is invaluable. And it positions Ukraine to become a major player in the global defense market, particularly in autonomous systems and drone warfare. But here's what really keeps me up at night, and I want you to consider this carefully. We're creating a world where the decision to go to war becomes easier because the human cost is perceived as lower. When wars can be fought by machines, when casualties are measured in hardware rather than body bags, the political calculus changes. Leaders can commit to military action without worrying as much about domestic opposition to casualties. The public tolerance for prolonged conflict increases when it's robots dying instead of soldiers. And that means more wars, more interventions, more conflicts that drag on because there's no domestic pressure to end them. The humanitarian benefit of protecting soldiers with robots comes with the strategic cost of making war more politically palatable. And let's talk about proliferation, because this is where things get really messy. Technology leaders at the United Nations and the Vatican worry that the use of drones and AI in weapons could reduce the barrier to killing and dramatically escalate conflicts, with experts stating that cheaper drones will enable their proliferation and their autonomy is only likely to increase. Once this technology is deployed at scale, it's everywhere. You can't uninvent it, you can't recall it, you can't put restrictions on it that will actually be enforceable. The knowledge of how to build these systems, the basic components, the software algorithms, all of this will proliferate globally within years, maybe months. And not just to state militaries, to everyone. Criminal organizations, terrorist groups, militias, private military contractors, authoritarian governments looking to suppress dissent. Imagine a world where every regional conflict, every border dispute, every territorial disagreement can be prosecuted with swarms of autonomous drones and ground robots, where the threshold for using military force drops because you don't have to worry about casualties, where escalation happens faster because machines react in milliseconds, not the minutes or hours it takes for human decision-making, where the fog of war becomes impenetrable because you've got thousands of autonomous systems making split-second targeting decisions based on sensor data and AI algorithms that nobody fully understands. That's the world we're building right now in Ukraine. And here's something else that's not getting nearly enough discussion. In a November 2023 interview, Ukraine's former commander-in-chief, Valery Zaluzhny, compared the battlefield to the great conflicts of a century ago, stating they had reached a level of technology that created a stalemate, and breaking the deadlock would require a significant technological leap involving unmanned and robotic systems. The stalemate is breaking, the technological leap is happening, but what comes after? Because historically, when warfare goes through a revolutionary technological shift, the strategic balance doesn't just tilt, it gets completely rewritten. Think about what happened when machine guns were introduced, or tanks, or nuclear weapons. Each time, there was a period of chaos and adjustment where nobody fully understood the strategic implications, and a lot of people died while everyone figured it out. We're in that period now. The rules are being rewritten in real time. The norms are being established through battlefield outcomes rather than international negotiations, and the implications are profound. A Ukrainian operation in late 2024 made history as the world's first ever assault, conducted entirely by ground and aerial drones, with fighters from the 13th Brigade of Ukraine's National Guard executing the mission to set the stage for further advances without risking a single soldier. Zero casualties. Complete success. That's the selling point. That's what every defense ministry in the world is looking at right now and thinking, we need that capability. But let's be honest about what we're really looking at here. This isn't just about technological innovation or military effectiveness. This is about a fundamental shift in the nature of power. When you can project force without risking your own people, the calculations about when and how to use that force change completely. And not just for state actors. Think about wealthy individuals, corporations, private security firms. If an autonomous weapon system costs $35,000 and can be built in a shed, who can't afford one, or 10 or 100? We're democratizing the ability to use lethal force in ways that challenge the state's monopoly on violence. That has profound implications for social stability, for governance, for the basic structures of power that have defined the modern world. And here's where I'm going to make a prediction, because I think the trajectory is clear. Within 5 years, every major military will have autonomous systems as a core component of their force structure. Within 10 years, these systems will outnumber human soldiers in many militaries. Within 15 years, the idea of sending humans into direct combat will seem as outdated as cavalry charges seem to us today. The transformation is happening that fast, and Ukraine is ground zero. Ukraine's defense establishment has approved tracked robots carrying thermobaric launchers for bunker busting, and assault brigades have stood up dedicated ground drone detachments that field machine gun-armed vehicles for combined operations with quadcopters. They're not experimenting anymore. They're integrating these systems into doctrine, into unit structure, into their fundamental approach to warfare. Now, let me bring this back to what it means for America, because we're not isolated from this. We're deeply invested in the outcome of this conflict, and we're absolutely paying attention to the lessons being learned. The Pentagon is watching every engagement. DARPA is analyzing the data. Defense contractors are refining their products based on Ukrainian feedback, and the strategic implications are staggering. If autonomous systems prove decisive in Ukraine, if they fundamentally shift the balance of power, then every calculation about military readiness, about force projection, about deterrence has to be revised. The entire structure of American military power, built on highly trained professional soldiers and expensive high-tech platforms, might need to be reconsidered. And that brings us to the really uncomfortable question that nobody in Washington wants to address publicly. If wars can be fought by machines, what happens to the military-industrial complex as we know it? The profit margins on a $35,000 robot built in a shed are very different from the profit margins on a $100 million fighter jet or a $1 billion destroyer. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman are going out of business. They're already pivoting, already developing their own autonomous systems, already positioning themselves to dominate this new market. But the economics are fundamentally different. When you can produce effective military capabilities at a fraction of the traditional cost, it changes the defense acquisition landscape. It opens the door to new players, smaller companies, startups that can innovate faster than the traditional primes. Which is exactly what we're seeing in Ukraine. Ukrainian startups are playing a crucial role in advancing battlefield technology, with around 250 companies contributing to the war effort, one developing an unmanned ground vehicle in just 4 days in a shed, costing only 10% of what an imported model would. This is disruption in the truest sense of the word, not the Silicon Valley marketing buzzword version, actual disruption of established industries and power structures. And when you disrupt something as fundamental as military power, everything else gets disrupted too. Geopolitical balances, alliance structures, arms control agreements, international law, all of it has to be renegotiated in light of this new reality. So where does this leave us? What are we supposed to do with this information? Because it's easy to feel powerless in the face of these massive technological and geopolitical shifts. But I think understanding what's happening, really understanding it, is the first step. We need to be having conversations about autonomous weapons that go beyond the simplistic narratives, not just technology saves lives versus killer robots are bad. We need nuanced discussions about accountability, about proliferation, about the changing nature of conflict, about the economic incentives driving development, about who benefits and who bears the risks. And we need to be asking hard questions about where this is heading and whether we're comfortable with that destination. Because the choices being made right now in Ukrainian workshops and defense ministries and corporate boardrooms are going to shape the world for generations. The first time a robot army scored a confirmed kill on the battlefield, that's not just a tactical development, that's a historical inflection point. That's the moment when science fiction became operational reality, and we're all going to have to live with the consequences of crossing that threshold. The bottom line is this: Ukraine has opened Pandora's box. The autonomous weapons revolution is here. It's not coming, it's already arrived. The question isn't whether this technology will reshape warfare and global power dynamics. It's how fast, how completely, and who's going to be left holding the bag when the dust settles. And I'll tell you right now, it won't be the defense contractors or the venture capitalists or the government officials who greenlit these programs. It'll be ordinary people trying to live their lives in a world where the rules have fundamentally changed, where threats can materialize from autonomous systems that nobody fully controls, where the barriers to using force have collapsed, and where the old frameworks for managing conflict and maintaining stability no longer apply. That's the world we're building, whether we chose it or not. And it's happening right now in real time on battlefields in Eastern Europe. Welcome to the future. I hope you're ready for it, because it's not slowing down and it's definitely not going away.